Hello, welcome. I'm Marcia Saxton with the World Institute on Disability. I'm the project director for this joint project, TRACS, the Transportation Resiliency, Accessibility, and Climate Resilience Project. We're now 2.5 years into the project. We'll eventually introduce all of our speakers today, but I'd particularly like to introduce at the outset our main partners with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, Brennan Shelton and Shimon Israel, both from the commission. Again, welcome everyone. Also, I want to say a thanks to our captioner who's going to be providing closed captions for hearing impaired participants. And I think we're ready to go to our first slide. This is Shimon and Hazel. Okay, as I said, the World Institute on Disability and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission have collaborated for these 2.5 years on this research and information gathering project. We want to thank the California Department of Transportation, Caltrans, for their funding and their commitment to accessibility for passengers with disabilities. Our theme for today's workshop is ensuring access is everyone's job, and this focus is particularly for transportation professionals. Next slide. Our agenda for today is welcome. We're doing quick introductions with our panelists as we go through. We're going to briefly review TRACS outcomes projects, which will soon be posted on our website for the World Institute on Disability. We're going to discuss our workshop goals. We will briefly discuss disability basic concepts, including universal design. And today we have a panel of speakers whom we will introduce when we get there. We will be very much welcoming recommendations and discussion and affirm our commitment to accessibility. Okay, TRACS is this 2.5-year research, policy analysis, and public education initiative to improve collaboration between transportation agencies and people with disabilities in the 9 counties of the San Francisco Bay Area, which include Alameda, Contra Costa, Marin, Napa, San Francisco, San Mateo, Santa Clara, Solano, and Sonoma. This project is funded through the Sustainable Communities Focus of Caltrans SB1 grant program. And again, thank you to Caltrans for your commitment to accessibility and for sponsoring this. We have a question. Yes, we will discuss the slide. Our achievements, which again I mentioned will be posted on our website for the World Institute on Disability, with the potential to repost on other disability agencies' websites. We have created a wonderful access active policy advisory board, some of whom are joining us today. We have completed our research documents, and we'll continue to post new documents as we complete them on our website. We've held multiple community workshops, focus groups, interviews, events over our 2 years. And these 2 workshops, this one today for transportation professionals and next week for disability community, passengers, activists, and so on, advocates, are our final workshop. And we are completing this project at the end of February. Okay.
Yeah, I'll take it.
Adrian.
So thanks to all of our participants today in this webinar and to those who have participated along the way. As we mentioned, this is our final event focused for our colleagues who work at transportation agencies. We have a few goals for today's workshop. First, we're going to focus in on a few wide-ranging concepts of disability inclusion, and these concepts have broad applicability and should be meaningful to your work regardless of what your actual job scope is. Second, we have a few speakers who will talk about their experience working with and through community advisory committees, the types of working groups or councils that we're all very familiar with in our work at public agencies. And lastly, our slogan for this workshop is ensuring access is everyone's job. So we hope to solicit commitments from you to go beyond your regular advisory councils and make new contacts with disability organizations in your area. This will help to root the concept of accessibility in your work and will help to improve accessibility more widely in the Bay Area transportation systems. So before we begin, I want to set the stage and I want to share something that I recently heard during the Senate confirmation hearing of Pete Buttigieg for the Secretary of Transportation post. Senator Tammy Duckworth said, accessibility must be considered at the forefront of all policy development rather than treating it like an afterthought or a box checking exercise. We really need strong leadership from you. I want us to all hear this quote from Senator Duckworth and pretend that she is speaking directly to us. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Marcia, who will kick us off with some of those disability awareness basics.
Okay, disability awareness basics. This is a very cursory list. I'll elaborate a little bit, but we're going to keep emphasizing that part of our commitment to ensuring access is creating long-term active relationships with local disability organizations. So there's constant interchange and reinforcement of inclusion, accessibility, and so on. So this is just very brief introduction to basic concepts of disability awareness for those who may be new to this. The first is, we may have heard all our lives, don't ask, don't care, there's disabilities. This may seem polite, but it keeps us uninformed. So our suggestion is, if you need information, respectfully ask. And if you're just curious, don't ask, because it is intrusive unless you're friends. And there's much more to say about that, and you'll be able to have those dialogues with the community. So, and then the fear of saying something wrong, the wrong word, it's rude, and so on, is confusing. And staying away out of these fears is part of the discrimination. It prevents connection and adds to the isolation. So the suggestion here is go ahead, take a risk, connect as human beings with respect, with common courtesy. Connection is hugely important to moving this process forward. Another is countering the stereotype that people with disabilities are alone, lonely, isolated, although we are during the lockdown, as everyone. But for people you're going to meet out and about in transportation, in the city, and in ordinary life, people with disabilities have full lives. Their disabilities are not the main focus, they're the hardest thing in life. Next slide. These are some technical distinctions that we make in disability awareness and disability studies. The medical model is the old-fashioned model of disability that locates the problem of disability in that individual's body. So this may seem like common sense because, well, the reason they don't have that job is they can't climb the stairs to the office building or the factory or whatever. But we contrast that old model with the social model, which locates the problems of disability in discriminatory attitudes and policies and barriers in the environment. The social model arose in the 1970s and is such a useful perspective because it enables everyone to be able to do something about the problem rather than fixing the person's body by medical intervention, which may not be appropriate or useful or possible. The social model encourages accessibility and awareness. Nothing about us without us is a fun slogan in the disability community that's now used worldwide, which challenges patronizing assumptions that other people know best. So people with disabilities are experts in access and accommodation and should be included in every step of planning and implementation of policy. So nothing about us without us. And so now, just in reference to the full population of people with disabilities, people with hidden or invisible disabilities, for example, people with arthritis, hearing impairment, cancer, this hidden disability population is the majority of this population and are equally entitled to accommodation with wheelchair users and blind people. Now, wheelchair users and blind people have visible disabilities, and we can tell that they may need assistance with certain kinds of accommodation. But this is also true for people with invisible disabilities. Okay. Universal design is very interesting and important to the evolution of the disability rights community. This is typically called the 7 qualities of universal design. It's very much important, very useful in transportation. And our goal is to fully implement these components of transportation design and operation. They're pretty self-explanatory. Equitable use means everybody, or pretty much everybody, can use the facility, the vehicle, the resources. And all 7 of these are based on extensive research over decades, including the broadest population of people with disabilities. Do they include absolutely everyone? Hopefully, eventually, especially with new emerging technologies. But we need to keep in mind, like, flexibility in use means that there are adjustable components to the design. Simple, intuitive just means it makes sense and it's obvious. Perceptible information may particularly refer to people with hearing impairments or visual impairments, so the information is available through Braille, through captioning, and so on. Tolerance for error really refers to if there's something unusual, there's an accident, emergency, and there are options, for example, alternate. Low physical effort refers to particularly to wheelchair users and to people with disease conditions where, you know, the ramp is not too steep and the level entrance is accessible and easy to use. Size and space or approach and use means that there's enough space for the capacity, the expected capacity of the facility or vehicle. So people can move freely, the hallways are appropriately wide and safe. Okay. Brennan.
Thank you. Thank you, Marcia. So we hope that you'll keep these concepts handy and that you'll consider them as you do your work. I would ask that you print them out and maybe post them up right next to your computer screens, because it's these concepts that will animate the existing laws and codes that we are already following, like the Americans with Disabilities Act. Under these codes and other laws, transportation agencies are required to practice inclusivity, which we all do. All of our agencies conduct public engagement, and we have citizen advisory boards, and we take public comment. And yet, even here in the most progressive Bay Area, transportation agencies continue to design and implement projects and programs that may meet the letter of the law, but they're not accessible to people with disabilities. We've all heard the angry voices and complaints at our public meetings. And I've been asked by more than a few colleagues to explain, and I'm just going to be brutally honest in my phrasing here, but I've been asked to explain why people with disabilities are so pissed off about our transportation systems. These systems are all compliant with the ADA. There's nothing nefarious going on with our transportation agencies trying to keep out disabled people. But for the great majority of people with disabilities, our transportation systems simply do not work. And right now, we're experiencing this unprecedented and exciting wave of equity work. All of our agencies are looking at how to better design our systems and how to serve the underserved. And as we move forward into the future, we need to be thinking about how to ensure that our agencies are incorporating the disability community more fully, and that people with disabilities play more of a role in designing our transportation services. Next slide, please. So we have 3 presenters for you today. Our speakers will talk about their experience working with or through advisory boards or councils, And we're going to have a Q&A session at the completion of our 3 speakers, but feel free to type questions into that Q&A box as we go. So first up, we have Annette Williams. Annette is the director of the Accessible Services at San Francisco Municipal Transportation Agency, and she's been there since 1990. Her team is responsible for accessibility to SFMTA's fixed route systems, including trolley and diesel bus, light rail, historic streetcars, and the cable car services. Her office also manages the contract for San Francisco Paratransit, and she's also responsible for overseeing accessible design and review for transportation-related capital projects that includes public transit, bicycle, parking, and pedestrian access in the public right-of-way. There's basically nothing in San Francisco that Annette doesn't touch. So Annette, thanks for being with us here today. Take it away. Annette, are you with us? We know you're logged in.
Sorry,
There you
sorry
are.
about that. I was muted. That doesn't work very well, does it? Can you see me and hear me now?
You can.
Sorry, I was talking away to my, my house. Thanks for having me. My name's Annette Williams, as Drennan said, and I'm the Director of Accessible Services at MTA. And what Drennan and Marcia asked me to do was talk a little bit about kind of my on-the-ground experience in working with people with disabilities and using that input to make the system better, and what we as an agency have done in that area. And I'm not saying we've always been successful, but we have a really long working relationship with people with disabilities. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the things that I think have worked well. Next slide. As Drennan said a little bit in the introduction, we're unique somewhat as a transit agency because we have almost all the transportation functions under one organization. So not only do we do fixed route and paratransit, but we also work with the bike share program and the scooter share program, and we regulate taxi services and design and build the bike lanes. And so it gives us no excuses in terms of how do all these things work together, and how do you make sure that the whole system is accessible to people with disabilities. And we're trying to push the envelope on things like looking at adaptive bicycles and adaptive scooters, and looking forward, working a lot on the whole question of TNCs and Uber and Lyft, and how we make sure that those services are accessible. Just a little bit about Muni, which is our public transit system. We do about 700,000 trips a day pre-COVID. It's much lower now since COVID. Hopefully we'll be coming back as we all get vaccinated. And about 150,000 of those trips are for seniors and people with disabilities. And in paratransit, we have about 12,200 paratransit customers and do 700,000 trips a year. Next slide. Our advisory committees have been really important to our success. We've had a paratransit coordinating council since the late 70s. We just recently celebrated our 40th anniversary. And our multimodal accessibility advisory committee has been working with us since the early 1980s. And both of these committees are very active. We meet at least monthly. The Paratransit Coordinating Council has subcommittees of the different modes of our paratransit program. So we have a taxi subcommittee, which actually met today. We have a group van subcommittee and an SF Access, which is more traditional ADA service subcommittee. And what I think is somewhat unique with our PCC, and maybe it's true of others in the Bay Area, is that we bring a lot of stakeholders together, not just the customers, people with disabilities that use the service, agencies that serve people who use the service, but also the providers themselves, drivers and provider representatives, so that we can really hash and talk about things and have kind of all the players in one place. And I think that's been really helpful. In terms of the Multimodal Accessibility Advisory Committee, that committee advises us on all the other SFMTA services, predominantly Muni, but also our bicycle lane programs, parking, other MTA services that we do. And I just wanted to mention, I think Drennan talked a little bit about, well, so how do you go beyond your advisory committee? Some of the things that I think have been really helpful, and it's sometimes been working with community organizations. About a year and a half ago, we had a charrette with our Vision Zero Senior Disabled Working Group. And we brought together engineers that were working on separated bikeways, as well as customers, people with disabilities who would either use transit stops or the bikeways, or have to cross over the bikeways if there were parking buffered bikeways. And we've sat down in groups and really looked at the nitty gritty and had engineers hear directly from people with disabilities. And I think that was really helpful both ways. And for people with disabilities to hear what engineers were dealing with in terms of designing these facilities. Next slide. So some of the important factors that I thought, that in my career, I think have been, illustrative in terms of this working relationship. One is that you have to build relationships and trust with the people that are advising you, so that they trust that the advice that they're giving you, you're listening, that you're hearing them. And, I'm sure there's times when I haven't listened, or we haven't listened in the way that we should. But I think that's so important, because you've got to really hear what is it that people are having challenges, what works and what doesn't work. And then following up in terms of what changes have you made because of that input, so that you get back to them and say, here are the things that we've done that addressed what you had brought up. And that's the part about acting on that advice. Another thing that I've found is really important is the geometry. And I'll show you a few examples. Is, it comes often down to inches or, angles, like Drennan had talked about earlier. And that those things are very important. And who best to get information from but the people who are actually using it, and being able to try it out and give you feedback. Oh yeah, this works, this doesn't work. This works for my particular situation when I have a walker. This doesn't work well with my crutches. So that we're getting that information from people directly. And then another thing I think is always important, and I think we don't in the accessibility world always think about this, is money. We have to have funding. If we don't have funding, how do we implement the things that are important to the disability community? So we need to be part of that. The advisory committees and staff need to be part of that decision making when funding plans are drawn up. And often, we come late to that game. So I think that that's something where we need to put more attention. And then one other thing I think is important to point out is that it's important that in the policy making arena that you have people with disabilities, not only at the board level, but at the staff level. And the more that people with disabilities are integrated into the the whole kind of hierarchy, board, staff, executive staff, the better you're going to be getting in terms of having input. So I think we've been fortunate to have quite a few really active members of our board that were and are people with disabilities, and I think that's been really important. So I just was going to show you a few examples. Next slide, please. So I don't know how many people remember back when we first started looking at low floor buses. When we first had accessible buses, they were all Lyft equipped. And then what the manufacturers came up with was a ramp that started at the door and went down straight from the door to the street. And in San Francisco, it's not realistic to expect that every single time a wheelchair user gets on and off the bus, or a person with a walker, or someone else who's not using the stairs or needs that, is that they're going to be getting on from a curb. Sometimes you have to get on in the street. And what we found with those lifts, by testing them with those ramps, by testing them with people with disabilities in our advisory committee, was they were too steep. If that ramp had to go down into the street, 2 of your wheels would come up when you tried to go up that ramp. And so we worked for a long time with bus manufacturers to say, really, this doesn't work for all situations. And we really need to have a longer run, meaning that the ramp itself was longer so that the slope didn't have to be as steep. And so we got a few different things. And I think now almost all of the ramps that you see out there do not start at the door and go straight down. Either they start within the vehicle already, sloping and then come out when it folds out, or they're bifold like this one that you can see the example. And that really came from people with disabilities trying things out and saying this works and this doesn't work. Next, one other thing I wanted to mention, in the paratransit world, one of the things that we've done recently in terms of testing is, speed humps. Speed humps are really important to pedestrian safety because it slows the traffic on streets. But we are very concerned about what are the impact on people with disabilities if they're in a paratransit van and have to go over that speed hump. So we tested a number of different speed humps with people in the vehicles and let them give us their feedback, what worked and what didn't. And we've come up with one that has much more of a more gradual slope and a wider part at the top. And it's made it much easier for people to go over it. And of course, also you need to keep at lower speeds, like 15 miles an hour. Next slide, please. So the next one is about securement areas. Another thing that we noticed is in the original, early days, almost always the securement areas were right next to each other. So that if one wheelchair user was already in a securement on one side of the vehicle and another person came on, it was very difficult to maneuver to get into that securement area next to the individual that was already there. There just wasn't enough maneuvering room. So what we decided is that we needed, and this is all based on consumer input and our advisory committee, is we need to stagger those securement areas. And not only stagger them, but also make them longer so that there was more room, not the 48 by 30 that was the minimum required, but more like 55 by 30, so that there was a lot more room to be able to turn around and to back in and to have more flexibility. Next slide, please. Another thing that one of our advisory committee members came up with is, if you're an individual who isn't sighted or is low vision, it's very difficult to see, even if it's a large bus number at the front of the bus. If you want to make a complaint or you want to provide feedback, you want to be able to get that bus number without having to ask another customer. And so one of our advisory committee members, Jewel McGinnis here, came up with the idea, well, why don't we put the bus numbers in Braille and large raised letters, raised numbers, so that if we have all of it, if we have all of our buses with that number in the same place right behind the driver on that panel, people can find it if they want to find it on their own and not have to ask. Next slide. And then recently, we've all had to do a lot of kind of quick thinking with our response to COVID and to the needs that people with disability have. And in San Francisco, we've had to cut back some of our Muni lines to reduce to the core service. And so that, traditionally, almost every person who lives in San Francisco has a bus line within like 4 blocks. But with the cutbacks in service to our more core service, there was much longer distances that people had to travel. And so what we did was we implemented this program called the Essential Trip Card, the ETC card, which provides to any senior or person with disability a small amount, $60 per month in taxi value that they can use for essential trips. And the reason we were able to implement that program so quickly is all the work that people with disabilities had helped us with to implement the debit card within our paratransit program. So we were able to take this program that we had done for another purpose and translate that technology and do something very quickly. And we were fortunate because we've been working on a grant with the health department to do a special program at a few of our underserved health clinics in terms of transportation barriers. So we had set up a taxi program for that. And we already had kind of a registration method using Google Forms. And we were able to just quickly translate that and use that for the ETC program. And within 2 weeks, we had something up and running. And we're able to collect all this data, like the disability of the person, what are the trip needs they have, what ethnic groups they come from, so that we can see, are we really meeting the needs across the city? Are we meeting the needs of, are we meeting needs in an equitable way? And a lot of that was because we had done a lot of work with our advisory committee and gotten their feedback before. Another thing I think is really important, next slide, is is to celebrate your volunteers. Most people who work on these advisory committees are available to us as staff when we call and say, what do you think about this idea? Do you have any ideas? They're volunteers. They're not getting paid for this effort. And so one of our advisory committee members said, we already do an annual meeting in November and we have a big luncheon and we celebrate the drivers. But she said, we really need to do something that celebrates the PCC. So we started a annual luncheon, and we usually go to a museum or some kind of cultural event and often get docents that are able to take us on an accessible tour. And we have a lunch together and we get to build on those relationships, in a personal way and not just always working. So this is a picture of one of our previous luncheons at the De Young Museum. You can only tell because of the Demple building in the background. But it's, people on our PCC, not only the people with disabilities that use our service, but also providers and drivers. And there's a lot of relationships that have been built through that work. So I just included at the end, next slide, my contact information. Email is the best right now with working from home. So feel free, if anyone has any questions that we don't get to today, feel free to contact me. And I like this picture of San Francisco. It's a picture looking down Market Street at downtown, and there's no Salesforce tower yet. So it's an old one, but I think it's a nice picture of our city. We're fortunate because we're a dense city and we're able to, we're serving about 50 square miles, which is a lot easier than a lot of the services that many of you have in terms of meeting the needs of our dense community. So the next slide just has a few resources for those of you who get these slides afterwards. You can get access to our website in different areas on paratransit, on the services that we're doing during COVID, on the ETC program. There's a nice video there that shows how it works and some of our other services. So thanks a lot for having me. I really believe that a lot of our success has been because we have worked so closely with people in the disability community and seniors to hear that, what's important to them. And, and I think it was mentioned earlier, because of universal design, if you design things that work well for people with disabilities and seniors, often they work better for everyone. Like the calling out stops on the vehicles with automated announcements. All of us now are benefiting from that, or the overhead signs that tell you what the next stop is. There's so many things that have benefited many more people than the people with disabilities that have really advocated for them. So thanks a lot. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Annette. I want to remind our participants that we are soliciting your questions in the Q&A box. But up next, we have Ernest Rogers. Ernest is the chair of the Solano Paratransit Coordinating Council, and he's a member of the Solano County Consolidated Transportation Services Agency Advisory Committee. He has worked in a variety of initiatives and programs focused on youth mentorship, and currently works with inmates at San Quentin as a sponsor in leadership training programs and assisting individuals who are getting ready to return home. Ernest was born with osteogenesis imperfecta, and he is a public transit user. Ernest, take it away.
Thank you. Annette, you did a great job. Thank you. I'd like to thank everyone for having me here today. I'm going to take it from a different level, because the reason why I'm a volunteer, and the reason why I became a member of the Solano County Paratransit Coordinated Council is because I was having transportation issues. Being disabled, and number one, let me take you back. Since I've been disabled, and I look way because I was born in the 50s, and so I was raised.
Ernest, Ernest.
It wasn't a main thing for people to do. I'll do this and that.
Ernest,
Yes.
we're having trouble with your audio.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it's just slow. Maybe if you turn your camera off and continue speaking, it may come through a little bit clearer.
Do what now?
I'm suggesting maybe if you turn your camera off and continue speaking, we'll be able to hear you clearer. Oh, well, I think we lost him. Okay. Oh, there he is. Good.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah, let's give it a
Yes.
shot.
Okay, I will cut my camera off though, because you don't need to be seen really. Can you hear me? Look like I got off again.
For you. Yeah. Not
You
just
sound much better, so maybe it was just that might have taken care of it.
Okay. What I'm saying is basically what I want to do is I'm gonna take it from a different angle. I'm gonna explain a little bit about the changes I've seen in the disability world, dealing with public transportation. I was born in the South. I was raised in the South. I was raised in the 60s and the 70s. So I was raised in the 60s and went to college in the 70s when there was no ADA. When the idea of a person with disability was really to not even to be seen, basically, less known to be heard. But as time has gone on, and as I've grown, and as I've tried to do more for myself, and other people with disabilities stepped up, we seem to have been able to improve the services. So I joined the Solano County Paratransit Council because of that. I got caught one night, late at night, around 10, 11 o'clock at night, away from my house and unable to get to the house by bus. So that's basically where I come from. Now, Solano County has changed much. We're a different county than San Francisco. Are you guys hearing me? Nope.
Yes, we are.
Nope, I'm running my mouth and not getting heard.
We can hear you.
Oh, you are? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. I seem to be running a little fast because I'm a little nervous. But being caught late at night, far away from home, blocks away from home, not feeling well and not able, I felt like I needed to make my voice heard. So I went to a paratransit meeting I was told about on the bus. When I went, I was able to make my input. But it wasn't just my input. I know that the people there, they really cared. So they developed trust, like one of the things said. Another thing I found out through my years of being disabled is the fact that they do want to design stuff without our consent or without any knowledge or knowledge behind knowledge, any kind of knowledge about what does it take really to help a person to move, seamlessly throughout society, or especially mobile issues. Now, one of the things I've learned too is I work with all types of people. And one of the people I love to work with, one group of people, is veterans. But the thing I find myself hurting when I talk to a veteran is I really don't understand where they come from sometimes. But I can understand, I can feel, I can empathize with them when they lose a limb or when they lose their ability to move about freely. Being always asked for people to help you is a burden. But number one, on you. Number two, maybe on the people that's dealing with you. And so that puts a burden on the people with disabilities to want to be able to move about, want to be able to go. Because sometimes you need someone to go with you because you're scared of what might happen. You might need somebody because you don't know if there's going to be a hole in the road, if there's going to be, any of those means. So that's why I joined the council. We have grown quite a bit. We have changed a lot of things. We have done a lot of the things that were mentioned in there by Annette with the disability population. Some of my suggestions were made. I made some suggestions, and I saw them take fruit, and I saw how we changed. Now, Solano County is a little different in San Francisco. We got a bigger region, and people are way more spread out than a lot of the areas in San Francisco. We deal with a place called Rio Vista. That's way out. And they have an elderly population of people who have just became a mobility challenge. Okay, so we have to work with them, and we're trying to work them into a system where we can bring them into where the hospitals are. And we have taken all their advice. We have even had meetings in their town so that they could come. We try to make everything as approachable or as reachable as possible. So that's the basic thing about what I do. Another thing I found out is advocacy. People with disability need people that advocate for them. Not only because, oh, I feel, but no, because I really see the need. You know, the people, we try not to ask so much because we don't want to seem like we're a bunch of needy people. But we do need certain things. And the only way you can get it is you ask. The Bible says you have not because you ask not. So we begin to ask, and we begin to let our voices be heard. And that's how come a lot of changes are being made. There's another program we have in Solano County for the elderly. It's called a Go-Go Grandparent. We hooked up with a group, and what we do is we have where an elderly person can get, it's almost like Uber or Lyft. They pick them up, and when they take them where they gotta go, they call back and let the people know that they made it safe. And they pick them up and do the same thing. We have initial all kind of stuff in Solano County to help people with disabilities. The paratransit, I'm gonna tell you the truth. I don't use paratransit only because I'm too, I guess, how I wanna say it. Because with paratransit, you have to set a schedule. And me, I don't necessarily live by schedules. I do what I wanna do when I wanna do it. And I think that's the best thing about living, is the fact that you can do the thing that you wanna do when you wanna do it. And that's another reason why I joined the Solano County Paratransit Authority, is because I do appreciate the idea of being able to get to a bus stop that's not far from my house. Being able to, talk to them and say, hey, look, I need a little change on the route maybe that'll help a lot of people with disabilities. Being able to communicate that way makes it easier for me and for my friends who like to assist me, or who like to go with me even. So those are the things that I wanted to express at this meeting, is that, first of all, another thing, I would like to thank everybody, because it's your input, it's your ability, it's your passion to go out and ask people for their input. That has made this thing a whole lot better than it used to be. Because I remember when there wasn't a bus for a person with disability to even get on, let alone to be a person of color and sit on the back of the bus. We were not even allowed a seat on the bus. But now that has changed. So these things are a part of society, and that's thing that we do. What do I see? Ooh, man. Did you get hello?
Yes,
Hello?
thank you, Ernest. You went out there at the end, but I think we understand what you're saying.
Yeah, I was just basically saying that if they have any questions about how how I have seen the ADA work from 1990 to now, I'd be glad to help. And they still need a lot of improvement, but it's a lot more being done. Just asking. I'm better at answering questions than I am about just giving stuff. Okay?
Thank you. Understood.
You're welcome.
Thank you. So I do want to remind our participants about the Q&A box. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to type them in. And then our last speaker today is Susan Rotchi. Susan is the Executive Director of Independent Living Resources of Solano and Contra Costa counties. She is a member of various advocacy committees around the Bay Area, including the Blue Ribbon Transit Recovery Task Force that's helping to guide the future of Bay Area's transportation systems as we adjust to our new reality under COVID. She's a user of public transportation. And my favorite fact about Susan is that she is a former Ms. Wheelchair California. She is a real live beauty queen. Susan, thanks for being with us today. And the floor is yours.
I'm Susan Rotchi, and I am the Executive Director of Independent Living Resources. My background is I was in a car accident 25 years ago. And actually, to be really honest, I always thought ADA was in place until it became me, right? Go back to school, figured out paratransit, took that for about 2 years. Had a lot of problems. Learned to be an advocate for people with disabilities. And that is how my beginnings started 25 years ago. You know, I've seen it evolve in transportation. It has, Ernest is right, it has improved. And one of the reasons it has improved is because consumers or clients like us with disabilities make the change, right? Ernest gets on a committee, I get on the committee. There's very few people on those committees on transportation that actually ride transit to work or actually go to school. I mean, there's a lot of people that are making decisions about what we do, and they don't even ride the bus, right? So, and I'm sure Ernest can tell you stories where we have been left behind. I personally have, and been left behind or waiting outside in the pouring rain for an hour for paratransit. I mean, we can talk about some stories and share, and feeling like we are just second-class citizens, yes. But we made great strides, we absolutely have. But it takes a team to make great strides. I'm only speaking in Solano County, probably because Ernest is right. We're always on Jim's and Ron and Daryl's, you know, just on their behind to make change, you know, and not accept it's coming. You know, you have to be involved. And, you know, and because I also am the director of the Independent Living Center, we have a lot of complaints about transportation. And I feel their pain. I feel their pain because I know I've ridden the bus one summer when gas got so high, I just refused to pay the price. And I decided I was going to ride the bus every day all summer. And the first day I rode the bus, I said, I'm never riding that Solano Express again. And because it took me 3 hours to get to work. And it should have only taken me an hour and 15 minutes, but the Lyft didn't work. The bus driver didn't know how to use the Lyft. And you're talking, this was 5 years ago, guys, less than 5 years ago. And so when consumers call, I tell them, hey, paratransit isn't that reliable. Let's get you travel trained to ride the regular bus. That's a little bit more, but some people just can't. They live out in the country. They don't have that option. So, you know, so we have made great strides. And in Solano County, we have a program, as Ernest talked about, Go Go Grandparent. We also have a rideshare program that several of the nonprofits use a wheelchair accessible van for seniors and people with disabilities. And I do sit on various committees, as well as I am an advocate for, you know, for all disabilities, whether it's someone that's vision impaired, and, you know, at times some of my staff that, or my consumers that are vision impaired, you know, the simplest task could be, hey, announce the bus stop, announce the right bus stop. That doesn't take any money, right? It just takes education and pick up and let us know what bus stop you are at, right? So some takes money. So, you know, and that's what we always fight for, but some does not. And also, you know, the other thing that really goes a long way is courteous. Drivers, education, courteous, you know, compassion. And not telling a client or a passenger, hey, the next bus is going to come in 20 minutes or 45 minutes because my Lyft doesn't work and you didn't check the Lyft before you left. And so, you know, courtesy from drivers is, you know, is also, it's how you present it, you know, just like how we present ourselves. The other thing I wanted to talk about really quick is that bus schedules, and also because of COVID right now, you know, feeling safe in this environment, you know, and how we get our transit users back on the bus and on BART. And that's what the task force team, the Blue Ribbon Task Force team, is working on right now. And hopefully that, to reassure you guys, I mean, right now, transit is taking some great precautions to get us back on the bus. Some of the bus schedules have been delayed, you know, in other words, decreased because we don't have enough transit users. So until we start getting more transit users, will we get a lot of the schedules back up on track? So with that, if you have, I don't want to repeat a lot of the stuff Ernest has said, so, because we both live in the same county. And in Contra Costa County, I do ride the bus. And I have to admit, Contra Costa County, the one thing that I really like about Contra Costa County, you can ride the bus till 10 p.m. In Solano, that doesn't happen. So if you have any questions, please let me know.
We're working on it, Susan, in Solano County. We're working on it.
Okay. Well, I guess now is the time that we turn to the question and answer period. We've got these great panelists, a lot of good discussion and presentation, and we want to open it up to folks in the Q&A box. Take a look, see if there's any questions yet. No questions yet. Maybe as everyone's kind of getting ready with ideas, thinking about what they might want to ask, to our panelists, any best practices that have not been covered yet in terms of, you know, things about committees, about being the most effective that you can be in meetings, or about best practices for transit vehicle operation, anything that we've not touched on?
I would like to say that one of the best practices that we found in Solano is the fact that we have these meetings where we involve all the communities. We get to like a senior citizen center, and there we ask the people there, did they have any questions or comments about public transportation, or what can we do to better it? And that seems to work well. If you do it in different communities and in different locations in the communities, it seems to make, number one, it makes it, well, I want to say, it makes the transit authority look like it's involved in the community, which it is, and it may look like it's more accessible, which we hope it does, and then it makes people feel more like something's going to be done, because I can say what I want to say, and then later on I can see it happening.
We did get a question in the chat box. Do you think that forming relationships with elected officials is helpful, and any tips on doing so?
Yeah, actually, I'll answer that. I believe that
I would like to answer that one too. Working with vocational rehab, I have found it very helpful to contact public figures to kind of help push my aid a little bit. But not only that, but it develops a relationship with public figures, and it does help. It does help, and they do listen, because now as we begin to take more to voting, more to being heard, more to being seen, it does help.
Susan?
I think that consumers should absolutely contact their state legislator, their assembly member, and talk to them about how we can make change, because a lot of those legislators, actually most of the legislators, all of them, do sit on various transportation committees. So when you talk to their aide, the legislative aide, they really do take your information to heart. I always talk to our consumers. At our agency, we do at times help them draft a letter to the legislator, not just also participate in Capital Action Day. And we go with a list of things that we need in our community. And these are all people with various different disabilities. So absolutely contact your legislator and contact, whether it's your nearest independent living center and work with them on advocacy. And then the one thing I have to admit, even during this pandemic now, you're able to participate on Zoom and ask questions, because before it was really hard to attend those meetings for some people with disabilities. And so, that's another good practice, so.
Okay.
And I think another thing with policymakers is they hold the purse strings, right? Often that's where the funding comes from. So it's important to foster those relationships. One of the things that we worked on in the last, few years was this whole issue of accessibility to TNCs, to Uber and Lyft. And the legislature had to pass a law in order to set up the access fund to force really the TNCs to include accessible services as part of their service. And there's money attached with that. And I think that, without having the legislature do that, it probably wouldn't be able to happen, especially because it's, regulated by the state.
Any creative approaches to recruiting new PCC members? Do any of the PCCs provide any incentives other than paying for transportation costs to attend meetings?
I can answer, what we've done. One of the things that we do is we have elections in November at the annual meeting for the executive committee. So we try to get a broader group of people to come, and they're different affinity groups. There's people with disabilities, people who are older adults, and then agency representatives. And, I think that it makes it, they're representing others, not just themselves, but they're representing others. And I think that has had some help. And the other thing I think is to reach out to organizations, and like we've had a lot of work with the called San Francisco School District Access Program, and they work with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who finished high school and are now doing a lot of living skills. And a lot of the people from that group have gotten more involved in our advisory committee, and they're very, very rampant transit users. And so it's been so sometimes it's connecting with one person can get you to others that might be interested. I think word of mouth is sometimes the way that people, to actually get somebody to do something new, it usually someone has to tell them, you should try this out. Or they have an experience like Ernest, mentioned that got him involved. But I think often it's, hearing from somebody else, you can have a voice here. You can make a difference. You want something to change. That's been my experience anyway, that it's word of mouth that often gets people to actually act and come to meetings and to say, oh, well, maybe I want to be a member of that committee too.
Okay, we have a couple more questions. One, there's been a big push to provide less parking for development projects, but the amount of disabled parking is still based on a percentage of overall parking. As an amputee who counts every step, by which the percentage requirement of disabled parking is looked at again. This is true even at BART stations and other locations.
Unfortunately, we don't have someone here from BART.
Yeah, we can let
We
that.
don't have parking at our stations. The most part in San Francisco, we don't have any parking.
Okay.
Unfortunately, there's street parking, and we work towards, as the person was mentioning, the PROAG, which is 4% on the streets of accessible blue zones. There has been a lot of work that's gone on in terms of disabled parking and parking reform, because we do believe some people, sometimes spaces are filled up all day by somebody with a placard who, you know, then the spaces are not available to people with disabilities who may be coming for shorter periods of time. And maybe that person doesn't really need it for proximity. You know, and that's frustrating for people with disabilities, because often then you can't get to the front door where you're trying to go, because all the blue spaces have been filled since 6 o'clock in the morning when people came to work.
Agreed. Yeah. Susan, did you want to add something? I thought maybe I saw a hand.
We do have a lot of consumer complaints about the parking, not having nothing, expect, you know, since these are the baby boomers, they're aging, you know, and they're having also walking. There's just not enough. And you're Annette's correct. We've had a lot of people complain about, you know, you're someone that works in the city, parks there all day, and then someone that needs to get to an appointment in San Francisco for a medical appointment is unable to get that parking spot because somebody's been there because they're working parking all day. Yeah.
And we had a committee, disabled advisory committee on accessible parking a number of years ago, and there were recommendations to actually charge for blue zones, because part of the reason, at least they found in other states, that those spaces get filled up all day is because it's free and you can leave it there for 3 days. And so then there isn't the turnover that's needed for disabled people who want to park for a short period of time or come for a number of hours because they're parked up. And it's not just blue zones, it's all the parking spaces, because you can use a placard in any space and then not have to pay for parking. So there is, you know, there's some desire to have statewide, at least options for cities to be able to implement that, you know, limiting the time and potentially charging, and maybe then having like a low income amount for people who are lower income. Because the reason that there was no charge in the first place had more to do with the ability to pay, because the meters weren't accessible and there wasn't an accessible way to pay. And what it's morphed into is people using it, some maybe that don't need it because they like the convenience and the fact that they don't have to pay. You know, and it just takes going to a doctor and having your, you know, certified that you need it. But they found in some states where it went way down, like huge, many more spaces were available when they started to charge for parking, because all of a sudden those people who were parking there all day weren't taking advantage of that.
Good insight. Okay, next question. What is a good committee makeup to ensure people are trusted, respected, and heard? Disabled riders are clearly important, but I found that they often can only provide input with respect to their specific issues. Those are important, but often leave the full committee without the entire situation. I found that agencies that represent people with disabilities have a more universal perspective, but don't necessarily speak from personal experiences. So how do we get the balance right?
Either of you want to?
Susan, you want to take this one?
So I think that first of all, we need to start placing people with disabilities in leadership roles, right? That's the first thing. And also, or putting some, really doing a survey and getting some people that are transit riders, low income, a senior on a committee, because I do sit on a panel, several panels, and like I said, I'm sure Ernest and I are the only transit users, right? And they all have an opinion of what to say, but never been left behind or discriminated against. Because, hey, we have 40 able-bodied passengers on the bus. There'll be another bus for you, right? So we need to get people with disabilities in leadership roles sitting on those committees, and or doing some breakout workshops, or hey, if you're having an in-person meeting, get there by public transit, and let's see how your work has really been done. Okay, I'm gonna get off my soapbox.
Works, Susan.
I like what Susan said, because she's right. I know I've been on the town, and she and I have been only two in the room in a wheelchair, and I'm like, really? But the thing is, if they're in a leadership role, one of the things you have to find out about people is you got to find people that are empathetic, who look at other things, just not only from their side, but from other people's side. I know we have a young lady on one of our committee. She's disabled, she rides a chair, and she only looked at it from her side, and I be trying to tell her, a lot of things we can't change because we're not in that, we don't have that right, or we don't have that kind of change, but we can ask, you know, be sympathetic with them. And I think that's the biggest thing. You have to have people on the panel that can empathize and see from other people's perspective, and also the surveys. Surveys do good, because a person could be 6 feet in a wheelchair and a person that's 4 feet in a wheelchair. There's a difference right there, you know? So it just has to be, it got to be a medium ground, but you got to have someone that can empathize and understand how to go between those two grounds. A person in leadership role would help.
And I think that people, you know, who work together for a period of time with different disabilities, they become aware of the issues that their fellow users are dealing with, you know. And I think also, like, just the citizen, like, we have a citizens advisory committee that is made up of, you know, all different kinds of people, and having people with disabilities on that committee as well to be, you know, speaking from that voice, because I think there's not enough cross-pollination, and often people who are not disabled really don't understand the challenges that people with disabilities face in using public transportation, and they need educating. And that's why, like you were saying, having policymakers and those in, you know, executive positions to have disabilities, then they're in the room when those things are brought, and they can bring up their personal experience or their, you know, what they've learned from their work. But I do think that people who work for a period of time become aware of other people with disabilities and their needs as well, and not just their own. Like you were saying, the empathy and the understanding, and even just, you know, knowing the things that are important to, say, a person who's blind or a person who's deaf. You learn it from hearing from those people directly.
Very good. Yeah, empathy is always relevant, sure. We do have just one comment. So California Commission on Disability Access would be the place to take the parking issue up. And I did want to open the Q&A to anyone else who had a question for the panelists. It seems like maybe at the end, and we have a bit left on the presentation. Maybe we'll resume there then, shall we? Yeah. Okay. Right. This is actually my slide. Okay, so these are recommendations that we wanted to share for transportation agencies, and we don't presume to know what's best. These are some highlights that have been revealed from our project. 2020 was very much a year of discussion about equity, and one of the things that kind of came to the surface is discussion of pipelines. How do you get people into the relevant professions that have the relevant experience? And this is something that we want to investigate at MTC, but we feel that internship programs are a really good vehicle for people to get the right people in the right positions, and to get movement generally of people who have kind of that come from the disability community into planning professions. The next point, we want to foster relationships with go-to organizations in your county. The first stop will be your Centers for Independent Living, and we'll provide a list on the WID website as a product of this project. You want to have trusted relationships with people in the community, so you can just pick up the phone and have a sounding board if there's planned service changes that may impact the disability community. It doesn't, not every event needs to be a full-scale community outreach activity. Sometimes you just want to have a little bit of insight or perspective that can be represented in your work. You want to partner with community agencies to do the outreach. Transit agencies and MTC may not have the best relationship or reputation with the public, and I say that as an MTC employee. So sometimes it can be helpful to have the local touch, have a trusted agency which has a good relationship with the community, who may have more ongoing direct engagement. And it can be good to have those folks on retainer. So consider paying for those services. Either one agency or a bench or group of agencies can be helpful. And then you want to participate in county and regional emergency planning. So from time to time, there are tabletop exercises for emergency actions. You want to engage with them and practice. Be connected on the county level, but also be mindful of regional exercises as well. Every county has a different liaison in terms of setting these up. For some, those are sheriff's departments, others are health departments. We're going to add a list of those contact resources also on the WID resources page that we're developing. And so to the last point, you want to include disability and access into equity frameworks and analyses. So we have anti-racist and anti-discrimination policies. We perform equity analyses to measure disparate impacts of projects. But at present, we don't, or at least most of those types of equity analyses don't include disability and access. We have our own work to do in our own house at MTC when we evaluate future projects for a regional transportation plan. Historically, disability has not been included as one of the metrics. Related to this, I will make a plug for MTC's coordinated plan, which will include some off-the-shelf approaches for developing equity analyses. And that's still in development. But these are, in general, hard to put in practice and they're not fully developed, but continue to engage with us. It's all of our responsibilities to promote access, and that's been a theme of this presentation. But do continue to reach out and be engaged as we develop this together.
Hey, thanks, Shimon. So we've just about reached the end of our time together today. Hopefully you've learned something new or that you've heard something that will inspire you to expand how you include accessibility issues in your work. But we don't want you to stop here. We would like to ask for your commitment today to establish or strengthen your relationships with the disability community. We want you to be the champion who voices accessibility issues and perspectives at your work. We want you to start by reaching out to a member of your own agency's advisory board or to your local independent living resource center and tell them you heard this presentation. Tell them that you're seeking to include their perspectives in your work. Go beyond that box checking exercise and look to really incorporate the disability lens in your work. It's not going to be easy and it's going to feel awkward at times. You may be afraid that you're making a mistake of some kind, but I want you to remember Senator Duckworth's words to you that we need strong leadership from you on this front. Okay, and so in the coming weeks, we will definitely follow up with everyone who attended today or who was registered. We're going to provide this presentation and more resources to you. We want to help get you started on this. And I just want to thank everyone for your time and attention and your commitment to ensuring accessibility. Thank you.